The air in the old Corps Club hung thick and amber, the low hum of 30 years of shared history, tobacco, polished leather, cheap whiskey, and the metallic residue of silent ambition. It was the kind of silence that wasn't silent at all, but a layered sonic blueprint of rank. The soft clinking of ice for the generals, the slightly louder scrape of chairs for the majors, and the distant, almost unheard whisper of the ensign's fear. This place was built on reverence, a physical manifestation of the chain of command, where every glance carried a specific gravity. In the deepest corner, tucked away by the fireplace, a strategic oversight perhaps, sat Elias. To the casual eye, she was an afterthought, a piece of ornate furniture belonging to the man across from her, General Arthur Vance, 3 combat tours, 4 stars, and an ego that could cast a shadow across a continent. Arthur was loud tonight, basking in the warmth of recent budgetary approval. Elias, his declared guest, his quiet wife for the evening, sat still. She was framed by the dark mahogany, wearing a simple, custom-tailored silk dress that muted her presence, making her blend into the expensive wallpaper. She wasn't blending because she wanted to be invisible. She was blending because invisibility was her preferred state of readiness. Her face, framed by dark hair pulled back with ruthless efficiency, carried an exhaustion that wasn't fatigue, but the perpetual calculation of a machine running at peak efficiency. She was Sergeant Santos, though no one here knew the sergeant part, let alone the operator part. Tonight, she was Elias, the quiet accessory. Arthur leaned forward, his voice cutting through the already crowded air. "Elias, darling," he boomed, not asking, but dictating. "You haven't touched your sherry. Smile, woman. You look like you're waiting for a delayed execution." Elias, Santos, did not flinch. Her stare remained fixed on the middle distance, assessing the reflectivity of the brass railing 3 meters to her left. She offered a practiced, brittle curve of the lip. The smile didn't reach the cold silver reservoirs of her eyes. It was a bureaucratic acknowledgement, nothing more. "I find the atmosphere stimulating, Arthur," she replied, her voice a low, precise murmur, the kind of frequency that only high-caliber surveillance equipment could genuinely appreciate. Arthur laughed, a deep, self-satisfied rumble. He patted her hand dismissively, the action itself a microaggression of ownership. "She's a tech head, gentlemen," he explained to the 2 colonels flanking him, ignoring Elias's evident discomfort. "Brilliant with code, utterly useless with cocktail chatter. Just feed her quiet confidence and she'll power down." The colonels chuckled obediently. In this environment, General Vance's pronouncements were scripture, and Elias, the technical specialist capable of collapsing global infrastructure with a keystroke, was reduced to a quiet, compliant wife. This was the friction Santos lived with, the operational necessity of being invisible pitted against the visceral contempt for being overlooked. Then, the gravity shifted. The antagonist arrived. Captain Marcus Thorne was loud before he was visible. He was a newly minted major, still adjusting to the weight of the silver oak leaves on his shoulders, or rather, flexing the weight. He wore his uniform like borrowed confidence, his chest puffed out, fueled by 3 rapid-fire scotch and sodas, and the conviction that he was, at this moment, the most important man south of the Potomac. Thorne and his entourage, 2 lieutenant commanders desperate to be validated, stumbled toward the bar, their path slicing carelessly through the established order of the room. Thorne saw Santos instantly. He didn't see Elias, the person. He saw the object placed next to the power source. He saw a beautiful woman who was clearly bored, and therefore in his intoxicated calculus, available for his superior attention. He stopped 3 feet from their table. General Vance was momentarily engaged in a low-voiced debate about missile trajectory, his attention focused inward. This, Thorne calculated, was his window. Thorne leaned in, resting one heavy hand on the general's empty chair, smelling faintly of stale cologne and cheap Triumph. His voice dropped, but only to a stage whisper designed to be heard by everyone except the general himself. "Well, well," Thorne slurred, his eyes raking over Santos's controlled posture. "What have we here? The general's secret weapon? Looks like someone forgot the protocol for deployment." He chuckled, a wet, grating sound. Santos's stillness intensified. This was the moment. The disrespect wasn't just personal. It was a fracture in the operational matrix. Her role required total anonymity, but her training dictated swift, precise remediation of threats. Thorne wasn't a physical threat, but he was a hierarchical virus. She didn't look up. Her fingers resting lightly on the linen tablecloth were perfectly aligned. She was contemplating the exact pressure needed to crush the crystal glass in her hand without making a sound that would alert Arthur. "Ma'am," Thorne insisted, stepping closer, his shadow falling across her face. He used the term ma'am not as respect, but as condescension, a patronizing formality for a civilian who didn't belong. "You look like you need better company than a man whose primary concern is the curvature of his retirement package." His lieutenant commanders snickered, stifling their laughter with poorly concealed coughs. The room's overall sound level dipped. The low frequency of rank-based anxiety was increasing. They knew Thorne was sailing close to the edge of the abyss. Disrespecting the general's company was disrespecting the general himself, even if he was distracted. Santos finally lifted her gaze. It was a slow, deliberate movement. The narrator must pause here, for this moment was the epicenter of the slow burn. Her eyes, not brown, not blue, but a chilling, depthless gray, locked onto Thorne's. They were the eyes of a person who had seen the precise moment. Life leaves a body and had catalogued the data. "Captain," she articulated, her voice devoid of emotion, a pure synthesized tone of neutrality. "You are impeding a critical analysis." Thorne grinned, misinterpreting the controlled demeanor as coy nervousness. He leaned in further, dangerously close, and placed his index finger on the edge of her glass, pushing it slightly forward. "The only thing critical here, sweetheart, is your need for a real drink," he whispered condescendingly. "Let me buy you one, something less dusty." The arrogance was absolute. He had crossed the line from drunken flirtation to overt insubordination, assuming authority over a senior officer's guest, and physically invading her space. Santos inhaled, the movement almost imperceptible. This was not the breath of fear or anticipation. It was the calculated intake of oxygen required for maximum cognitive efficiency. In her mind, the threat assessment algorithm had just moved from yellow to hard red. General Vance finished his conversation and turned back, noticing the sudden silence and the close proximity of Thorne. Arthur's face tightened with irritation. He saw the breach of decorum instantly. He had spent his life protecting his territory, and Thorne was standing in his corner. "Captain Thorne," Arthur barked, his voice laced with the heavy metal of command. "Step away from the table now. Elias is not to be disturbed. She tires easily." Thorne immediately straightened, snapping to attention, the alcohol-fueled confidence evaporating into a plume of nervous sweat. He stammered, "General, sir? Apologies, sir. I was merely—" "You were merely forgetting where you were, Captain," Arthur corrected, his gaze a sharp chisel. "Go. Find a quiet corner and meditate on the importance of situational awareness." Thorne, humiliated, nodded frantically and retreated, dragging his two terrified subordinates behind him. But before he vanished, fueled by a mixture of scotch and spite, he committed the final, unforgivable tactical error. As he turned his back, he muttered, loud enough only for the table to hear, but intended for Elias, "Just a general's expensive accessory. No respect for rank when you haven't earned it." The words landed like a depth charge in the deep silence Arthur had created. Arthur stiffened, his face registering true anger now, not just for his reputation, but for the insult directed at his wife. But before Arthur could unleash the four-star firestorm, Santos acted. She did not raise her voice. She did not look at Thorne's retreating back. She simply lifted her crystal glass of sherry, the dusty drink Thorne had mocked, and, without taking her eyes off the general, she spoke a single, low-register sentence. A sentence that was not English, not Russian, but a pure, unadulterated procedural code. "Sierra Echo Tango, 506. Acknowledge proximity violation. Initiate clearance protocol Gamma 1. The effect on General Arthur Vance was immediate and seismic. The fury drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, bone-deep terror. His entire body rigidified, his shoulders snapping back with a violence that suggested an electric shock. The change was so swift and so complete that the two colonels flanking him actually shifted backward in unconscious deference. Arthur swallowed hard, the muscles in his throat visibly working. The color of his face changed from florid aggression to an ash-gray fear. He understood the code, he understood the designation, and he understood the immediate requirement for Gamma 1 clearance. He realized his entire life, his 4 stars, his reputation, his command, depended on the next 30 seconds of perfect, absolute obedience to the quiet woman across the table. General Arthur Vance, 3 combat tours, decades of earned respect, slowly rose to his full height. His movement was not the casual standing of a dining officer, but the controlled mechanical rise of a soldier, reporting to his superior officer. He did not look at Elias. He looked past her, toward the main entrance of the club. His lips barely moved as he whispered to his colonels, who were watching in confused horror. "Gentlemen, we are entering a classified environment. Assume silence. Assume absolute operational readiness. Failure to comply will be treated as failure to engage the enemy." The colonels were too terrified to question the order, the sudden shift from social hour to tactical alert palpable. General Vance took 2 stiff steps toward the table. He reached out, not to comfort Elias, nor to apologize for Thorne's behavior, but to perform a precise, predetermined action. He picked up the bottle of extremely rare single malt scotch that sat in an ice bucket nearby, a bottle specifically designated for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, only to be uncorked upon his physical presence. General Vance, the pinnacle of the U.S. military apparatus in this region, uncorked the bottle. He took the crystal glass that Thorne had insulted, and with a hand that now shook slightly, he poured a generous measure of the restricted scotch. He then moved around the table until he was standing directly behind Elias. Sergeant Santos. He placed the scotch glass carefully on the table directly in front of her. He didn't just place it, he served it. As he was setting the glass down, the massive antique oak doors of the old Corps Club swung inward with a solemn, silent grace. The sound of the hinges, normally oiled to invisibility, suddenly echoed like thunder. The entire room went instantly, terrifyingly quiet. The hum of rank dissolved into a vacuum. 4 figures entered. They were not subordinates. They were gravity personified. The first was Admiral Jennings, Chairman of Naval Operations. The second, General Roth, Chief of Staff of the Air Force. The third, Admiral Chen, Director of National Intelligence. And the fourth, General Hastings, the legendary near-mythical architect of Special Operations Command, the man whose face was rarely seen in daylight. All 4, 5 stars, 4 stars, 4 stars, 4 stars. They represented the highest operational authority in the hemisphere. They were not expected. Their presence was a national event. Captain Thorne, who had just retreated to the darkest corner of the room, watched the generals and admirals enter. His mouth went dry. He was watching his career evaporate in real time. He prepared his salute, already practicing the most profound display of deference he had ever mustered. The 4 figures paused. Their eyes swept the room, not looking for Vance or Thorne or the colonels. They were looking for the epicenter of the code, the location of Gamma 1. Their eyes found Elias. Or rather, they found Sergeant Santos, sitting silently at the dark table, sipping the sherry, completely unfazed by the sudden arrival of the high command. The 4 most powerful military officers in the country began to move. They walked directly across the polished floor, ignoring every other officer who had snapped rigidly to attention. Their footsteps were silent, their focus absolute. They stopped 3 feet from Elias's table. General Vance, still standing behind Santos, serving the illegally poured scotch, waited. Admiral Jennings, the chairman of Naval Operations, stepped forward. His expression was not social. It was the intense focus reserved for the highest threat assessment briefings. He looked directly at Sergeant Santos, the woman Arthur had just belittled, and Thorne had insulted as a general's expensive accessory. Admiral Jennings brought his right hand up to his brow in a perfect rigid 5-star salute. The sound of the gesture was not metallic, but the collective audible gasp of every officer in the room. The other 3 generals and admirals followed suit simultaneously. 4 salutes, executed with maximum precision, directed at the quiet woman in the corner. The total silence of the room was now oppressive, a physical weight crushing the air from the lungs of the onlookers. Captain Thorne felt the blood draining from his head. He was witnessing an anomaly that defied all known military laws of physics. Santos, Elias, did not return the salute. She was not required to. She was designated non-responsive to outward command during internal operational analysis. She simply raised her scotch glass, took a small, deliberate sip, and set it down. Then she spoke, still addressing the generals, but her voice carried across the frozen tableau. "Gentlemen," she acknowledged, the single word, a quiet command. "The Gamma 1 status is confirmed. Operationally, you are 2 minutes behind schedule. My findings indicate a critical security loophole in the projected trajectory." Admiral Jennings snapped out of his salute. "Sergeant Santos, my apologies for the delay. Traffic gridlock on the North Corridor." "Sergeant Santos, The rank hung in the air, a physical impossibility. A sergeant, but receiving the direct, unquestioning deference of 4, 5, and 4-star officers. General Vance, standing guard behind her chair, finally spoke. His voice was raw, stripped bare of all 4-star arrogance, possessing only the thin, high-pitched anxiety of a soldier reporting a severe infraction. "Admiral," Vance reported, his eyes sweeping momentarily toward the corner where Captain Thorne was now visibly ill. "There has been a serious breach of protocol in the immediate vicinity. A Captain Thorne, recently promoted, failed to acknowledge the classified nature of the subject's presence." Admiral Jennings didn't even bother to look toward Thorne. He kept his focused gaze on Sergeant Santos. "Severity, Sergeant." Santos leaned back slightly in her chair, finally making eye contact with her generals. She considered the question, not through the lens of offense, but through the lens of security. "He attempted to assert casual authority," she explained, her voice gaining a fractional measure of coldness. "He committed physical intimidation, and failing to recognize my cover designation, he attempted to disrupt the operational silence. His final verbal infraction indicated a failure to grasp the foundational principles of earned respect versus presumed rank." General Roth, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, clenched his jaw. "The failure to acknowledge a Black Ops asset of this level, Vance, is an unacceptable security leak. He jeopardized—" Vance cut him off, his voice desperate to take responsibility for the immediate operational zone. He knew what was needed. He stepped forward, putting himself between the Admirals and his superior officer, Sergeant Santos. He looked across the room, directly at the figure of Captain Thorne, who was now leaning against the wall, trying desperately to become part of the plaster. "Captain Thorne!" Vance's voice thundered now, not with the arrogance of a general, but with the terrifying righteous anger of a commander watching his entire theater of operations burn. "Report to this table. Now." Thorne stumbled forward, his uniform suddenly too large for his shrinking frame. He reached the table and stood shivering at attention, his eyes fixed on the tablecloth, unable to look at the 4 powerhouses staring through him. "Captain," General Vance stated, the finality in his voice absolute, "you committed the gravest infraction possible in this service. You assumed the lowest rank in the room was available for your disrespect. You assumed that the woman beside me was merely a prop." Vance paused, ensuring that every officer in the club, from the colonels hiding their faces to the bartenders freezing mid-pour, understood the magnitude of the next statement. Vance turned his head slightly toward Santos, his gaze snapping back to Thorne immediately. "Captain Thorne," Vance announced, his voice lethal, cold, and final. "You did not merely disrespect my guest, you disrespected an asset who carries the highest operational clearance our nation can issue. She is not my wife, she is not my guest." Vance stepped fully to the side, presenting Sergeant Santos, the quiet woman in the silk dress, to the humiliated Captain Thorne. "She is Sergeant Santos," Arthur stated, his voice cracking with the strain of this public submission. "Special Operator Technical Command, currently designated as the primary architect for Project Chimera, a project that, if compromised, would result in the immediate collapse of the entire regional satellite defense matrix. In this room, in this entire theater of command, under the terms of Gamma 1, her rank is irrelevant. Her authority is absolute." Vance straightened his 4-star uniform, pulled his shoulders back, and executed a deep, profound bow to Sergeant Santos. "Captain Thorne," Vance concluded, the sheer weight of the general's statement crushing the major's career into fine powder. "I am reporting to my superior officer, see Sergeant Santos. And you, Major, just treated a national strategic asset, my superior, like a dusty bottle of sherry." Sergeant Santos lifted her head. The gray eyes settled on Thorne, not with hatred, but with a scientific, clinical indifference. "Major Thorne," she corrected, using his correct, recently acquired rank, making the humiliation even sharper. "You confused stillness with weakness. You confused discretion with subservience. You failed the basic assessment of power projection." She did not wait for his answer. She looked at Admiral Jennings. "Admiral, regarding Captain Thorne, recommend immediate transfer to non-sensitive administrative duties. Full operational security review. He is statistically unstable in high-pressure environments. His ability to correctly read the room is 0. Jennings nodded instantly. "Consider it done, Sergeant. Effective immediately, Major Thorne is on administrative leave pending full investigation." Thorne opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The generals had not just reprimanded him, they had surgically excised him from the armed forces without needing a single court-martial. Sergeant Santos finally rose. The small movement was not dramatic, but it commanded the attention of 4 admirals, a general, and the entire high command personnel of the club. She adjusted the collar of her silk dress, the only movement of unnecessary vanity she allowed herself. She took one last slow sip of the forbidden general-served scotch. It was perfect. She looked at Thorne one last time, delivering the lethal, quiet verdict. "Respect," she whispered, her voice carrying the absolute coldness of a weapon being locked and loaded, "is earned by performance, not by stripes, not by leaves, and certainly not by volume." She placed the empty scotch glass precisely on the tabletop. She walked past the 4 saluting frozen admirals who maintained their deference until she had passed them entirely. General Vance moved to follow, but she stopped him with a slight, almost imperceptible gesture of her hand, a technician overriding a faulty system. She walked toward the exit. She did not hurry. She did not look back. The silence she left behind was not the absence of noise, but the massive vacuum created by the complete and utter inversion of established order. The heavy oak doors closed behind her with a soft click, sealing the room and sealing Captain Thorne's fate in the sudden, terrifying realization that the quiet woman in the corner had not been a distraction, but the operational core of the entire installation. If you believe respect is earned by blood and not by rank, type respect in the comments.